Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Make Things Better podcast. Today I have Ilona Alcock, co-founder of Elevate, on the show to talk to us a little bit about how businesses can do better in terms of the environment and also to hear more about Elevate. So thanks for coming on, Ilona. How are you doing today?
I'm really well. Thanks ever so much for having me on.
Yeah, cheers for coming on. I do appreciate it. It was my dad who put us in touch through a pretty random LinkedIn message, but I won't go on to talk about that too much.
Nice blast from the past there.
Yeah, I know. I can't believe that you met him like 9 years ago. Pretty random, really. Yeah. Anyway, so do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing lately and also what Elevate does?
Absolutely. So I've had a very varied career. I think it's now politely called a portfolio career, but I'd worked in everything from recruitment. I was a commercial litigator at the world's largest law firm. I'd run a tech startup with my husband, spent some time working in higher education, and as we headed into the pandemic, was working for an events-based business development organisation. Now, as you can imagine, given that what we did was to bring large groups of strangers together and put them into a combined space, that wasn't something that could continue once the pandemic hit. So we did about a month working from home, and then myself and one of my colleagues were placed on furlough. So I spent most of that glorious hot summer when we couldn't go anywhere other than our gardens, was spent on furlough, and found out in the July that myself and my colleague were both going to be made redundant. So it was a bit of a weird feeling of being made redundant, the world not being anything close to normal, my industry just not really there at all. And we had such a phenomenal network that as soon as they knew that we were going to be made redundant, we're starting to send through job opportunities and coming up with things that just might be things that we wanted to get involved in. And then my colleague Katie sent me a WhatsApp just saying, do you think there's something that we could do here together? And that little spark was essentially the start of Elevate, that we loved working together. We felt that there was a need for a really kind of fresh, agile approach to business development. We very naively, back in that kind of August, thought things would be back to normal by kind of Christmas 2020. We weren't expecting to spend so long online. But as soon as we started having those initial conversations around what the business might look like and what we wanted to do, it became really clear that our values were much more aligned than we'd really appreciated, that we really cared about creating a great place to work. We wanted to work with nice people. We wanted to work with businesses who were doing really great, positive things. We wanted to have a positive impact on the environment. And we kind of felt like if we had our dream client list, they were all the people that fit that mold. They were just people who really believed that like business can and should be a force for good. So we kind of, it came out of redundancy, and we're like, we're here, we're Elevate, this is what we're going to be doing. And the response was just absolutely overwhelming. Like, we literally launched on LinkedIn on my birthday. My husband had planned a surprise trip to the zoo, so I was literally like sitting by a penguin enclosure, like filing through like a million LinkedIn messages, people offering support, people wanting to set up meetings with us, have conversations, and it was just this incredible outpouring of love and support from the whole Greater Manchester business community.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I love how you kind of turned a negative, being made redundant. A lot of people would probably view that with a bad sort of negative perspective, but you completely, switch that on its head and manage to create something that probably aligns with what you want to be doing even more. And with your colleague as well, Katie, that sounds amazing. And I love to hear that you were next to a penguin while it was launched as well. Quality. So was it difficult then? I mean, it doesn't sound like it was particularly difficult, but did you find it difficult setting Elevate up during the pandemic?
There's definitely been some really challenging times. Literally, like trying to run events and BD in a pandemic is very challenging. So I think we were at the beginning, it was relatively easy in that there was a low barrier to setting up. It was literally like we bought a phone and a laptop and we were good to go. We didn't need a physical office. We didn't need any stock. A lot of the things that would kind of stop you from being able to set up on your own wasn't the case because of the type of business that we were running. We had that phenomenal network of support. We were really lucky that a company, Bruntwood Works, who are kind of property people that you'll know kind of across the north, their ethos is around creating thriving cities. They very much want to be known as that good business. They supported us literally from launch. So we kind of had that work coming in straight away, and I could not be more grateful for them taking that leap on us from day one. But then just getting that time to kind of really set out what we wanted to do in a weird way, because it was so difficult, because we were navigating this crazy world, that actually kind of worked in our favor, because it meant no one was doing what they'd always done. We couldn't do that. So people were much more willing to have a conversation with a startup. They were much more willing to try new things. We were happy that, you know, there were events that we literally had to replan 3 times because the restrictions kept changing. So it would start off being live, and then it might get to hybrid, and then we ended up, you know, in the middle of the second lockdown, literally just being able to bring people in and film and do the whole thing online. But we had the flexibility to be able to do that. But absolutely, I mean, like Christmas 2020 was a real struggle for both of us. Things had kind of started getting quieter towards the end of the year. You'd be sending emails and not getting responses. You're thinking, like, what have we done here? Like, what's going to happen going into January? Thought that as we kind of came into the new year, the world would be opening up again. And of course, the opposite happened, that little bit between Christmas and New Year, when it was suddenly like, the world's back, lockdown, and we don't know when you're going to be let out again. And my business partner and I were really conscious that over the Christmas holidays, we didn't want to be bothering each other with work, that it was like, so we kind of had our individual like little mini breakdowns over Christmas and didn't speak to each other. And then as soon as we kind of came back in the new year, we started talking to each other again and realized that actually that would have been helpful all the way through. And then everyone was literally just like, we're back in January, we'll deal with what we've got. You know, people were responding to messages from weeks ago, just being like, I was on wind down, like, we're back, we're ready to go. And yeah, January was then crazy busy, and to the point that we then recruited another former colleague in the February. So she came to join the business. But the real kind of learning from that was that we just needed to keep that line of communication open, that, you know, we keep each other safe, essentially. Like, one of us will be having, you know, a massive panic about, you know, where's the next lot of money coming from? Are we doing the right thing? What do we need to do? And the other one will kind of talk us down from there. And that kind of to and fro has made it much easier than it would ever have been to do it on our own.
Do you think, like, having that, you know, those few weeks where you probably weren't talking to each other as much, you think that's kind of made you stronger in a way now, though?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really just like reinforced the importance of that relationship. Like, we joke now that like we're becoming a shared brain. Like, you know, Katie and I will very often come out with exactly the same thing. We'll ask the same questions. You know, but poor Catherine, who works this, she's like, it's like I've had the same conversation twice, because she'll have flagged something up with both of us and the response has been the same. So knowing that you've got that complete alignment of values between all 3 of us just means you've got somebody there all the time. I've struggled a lot with anxiety over the last month or so, which is hugely out of character for me, and was coming out in a real anxiety around leaving the house and going to events, which is literally what I need to do my job. But those little warning signs that I wasn't quite all right, that something else was going on, Katie and Catherine picked up on those before I did. So they were there and then ready to support, and what do you need? And I could have those very open conversations with them, where if we hadn't kept that just very open, honest channel of communication going, I would have struggled a lot longer of just being like, I need to power through and pretend everything's fine. And luckily now I'm in a, you know, a much better place again. You know, we'll be going through therapy and kind of ongoing things to kind of support that down the road. But it was just that real constant learning that, you know, we have just got to be open and honest with each other. It's a small company. It's still a very difficult time going on around us. If you try and bottle things up and keep them to yourselves, you're going to damage the whole business.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And I think that's something that I've kind of learned over the last few years, is that really to be doing my best work, what I find personally is that I kind of need to be in the right headspace myself. So that's kind of taken priority for me. And, you know, I feel like that's such an important thing. But it's amazing that, you know, your colleagues were able to sort of spot that something was maybe going on. Like that just shows how close and how well they probably understand you.
It's so lovely to work in that environment, and it's like you say, it's knowing that you do your best work when you're happy and healthy and rested and all of that thing. So if something slips, which it will, there'll be things that don't get picked up, things that we perhaps could have done better, that for all three of us, when we look at, you know, what went wrong, why did something slip, why didn't we pick up on something, it's usually because we're too busy or we're stressed about something, and it's getting to that root cause and being, okay, so like something slipped, what's the additional support that we need to put in? Where we've all worked in cultures previously where if something slips, it's like, right, who do we blame for it? Whose fault is it? If things are slipping, everybody needs to work harder. And actually like moving that back and being like, what do you need to do your absolute best work? Like, it just makes sense that like you're doing your best work when you've had a good night's sleep, when you're not worrying about other things, you know, when you've had chance, you know, when we're in these kind of very short, dark days, you know, making time to get outside in the middle of the day when we have a little glimmer of sunshine, it's like, that's a really positive thing. So having the flexibility around hours makes a huge difference. And I think we felt very passionately that we never wanted to build a company that we didn't want to work for. So when we've got the opportunity to put those processes in place, we're building the company that we want to work for. So it has to work for us as people first, and then also be commercially successful. There's no point in setting up a business that makes loads of money but runs us all into the ground.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love what you said there about replacing blame with maybe a more compassionate approach. I think if the whole of society and the world did that more, the world would be such a better place, to be honest.
Massively. And I think, you know, we have such a blame culture in places, and it just creates this culture of fear around it. People then try and cover up mistakes because they're worried about what will happen. And it's, you know, everybody has done it at some point where you've made a mistake, you've tried to cover it up, and it's just been so much worse than if as soon as you realize something had happened, you'd be like, can I just tell you, this has happened and I think we need to sort it out. And if you know that you can take that to somebody and it will get resolved and you'll work through it, and that's whether that's internal or it's for a client, you know, we'll never try and cover that stuff up. You know, we're all human, we're all going to make mistakes, and we'll work through it. And if you do have that blame culture, you're just encouraging people to hide mistakes, which means they're harder to unpick later on, but also you don't learn anything. Like if you don't know why a mistake was made, you don't know how something was able to slip through the net, it will just keep happening and happening and happening, where if you can understand what the problem was, you've got some chance of being able to fix it and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, exactly. And I think most mistakes are just, as you say, an opportunity to learn. So what do Elevate specifically do? So I know a lot of it is connecting the right people who have similar values and who are maybe interested in reducing perhaps their CO2 emissions, or, you know, just doing other environmentally friendly projects and whatever else. But do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you do and what Elevate do? Because at the moment, I'm not 100% sure I fully understand what Elevate do.
Absolutely. And I think part of the issue is that we do a lot of different bits. So sometimes it's quite hard to kind of package that up. So the way that we kind of officially describe ourselves is that we're a business development consultancy focused on innovation, sustainability, and community. So there are kind of three pillars as to the kind of organisations that we want to work with. So our absolute sweet spot is where those three pillars overlap. So if you think of it as a bit of a Venn diagram, if we've got companies who are innovative, they're focused on the community, and they're doing great things in sustainability, then like that is absolutely our sweet spot. Like we love working with them. So Electricity Northwest is a great example of that. And they've got a huge decarbonisation agenda, very innovative business, constantly looking at new technical solutions, but also very community focused. And, you know, in the storms that we've just had recently, you can see, you know, they were out there delivering hot meals to people in Cumbria who were without food, did huge amounts of things in the pandemic as well. So that's our kind of sweet spot, is the overlap of those three pillars. But then in terms of how we actually go about delivering that. We talk about one of our kind of areas being this elevate yourself piece. So that's around our personal development. So that might be public speaking, it might be personal branding, it might be teaching people how to network, but it's very much about telling your own story and raising your individual profile. And that might be people coming to us as individuals who know that these are skills that they want to improve. Or it might be organisations who see the benefit in upskilling their colleagues to be able to say, well, we want you to be able to go out and talk about the business, we want you to be able to go and pitch. So they'll come to us for that kind of public speaking support to kind of, empower their colleagues to do that. We then have the elevate your business bit, which is more of our kind of traditional BD approach. So events are a key part of that platform. So that might be our own events where we'll bring people in as speakers to talk on different issues, or it might be events that we run on behalf of clients. So we're currently working on a really exciting event for startups and entrepreneurs. So that'll be an event for around kind of 500 people, around kind of some of the support that they can access. We've done stakeholder engagement events, we've done webinars on sustainability, all kinds of different things in that space. And then the carbon literacy kind of sits slightly outside of that. And I know it's something that we'll touch on a little bit later as well, but essentially I was sitting on the Greater Manchester Green City Comms board in my previous role, and also on that board was Phil Corbell, who's the founder of the Carbon Literacy Project. And as soon as he found out I set up my own business, like, you need to be training carbon literacy, I was like, that's great, but I've literally never even done the course myself. So did the course in November, absolutely loved it, developed our own course to be able to train, started delivering that in January, and then in February Elevate became the world's first carbon literate business development organisation. And that really plays into all three of those areas. I think when you hear about it, it's immediately sustainability, and that actually it plays into more innovative ways of doing things. It's that support in the community as well. So it's a great one for us to kind of feel like we're making a real difference in taking that training out and delivering it. But it's also really helped us solidify that reputation as being about good business, caring about the environment, and that attracts a lot of different organisations to us who would potentially have never come to us for that kind of upskilling piece. They might have never come to us for BD, but they'll come to us for that carbon literacy piece. So it's just another great way of us getting in front of businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that the carbon literacy project is seems to be kind of growing and growing. Like, a lot of businesses now are, using that training. And it sounds like a really, really good course. Everyone who I've heard about who has taken that course has absolutely loved it. So what is carbon literacy, and what does that really mean for a business?
So carbon literacy, it's about understanding what climate change is all about. It's understanding what you need to be able to do to reduce your carbon footprint. It's about understanding where you can get help to do that. And then it's measuring what you've actually done. And the reason that we were very attracted to this course over other kind of trainings on sustainability was that it's pledge based. So to become accredited, you have to do a full day's worth of training, demonstrate via a couple of kind of short paragraphs that you understand what we need to do to kind of get to net zero as a society. And then the most important part are these two pledges at the end. So one personal pledge. So what will you do as an individual to reduce your carbon footprint? So things like moving towards a plant-based diet, switching to a renewable energy supplier, reducing your travel. Obviously mid-pandemic, we all just kind of did that. So it's kind of looking as the world gets back to normal, what your kind of travel choices might be. Then also making a group pledge, which for most people is the organisation that they work in. So something that you do with a group of other people in your organisation to help reduce its carbon footprint. So that might be a whole raft of different things depending on what industry you're in. So we've had a hospitality group come through who changed their whole menu model from going away from brunch, which was quite a high waste, high carbon footprint offering, to pizzas, which are very, very low waste, very easy to make, vegan options, move towards more of a plant-based offering. And that's had a massive impact, not just on their carbon footprint, but also on the cost savings because we've reduced that level of waste. For other people, it might be around looking at the kind of the circular economy. So one of the property companies that we work with, every time a new tenant comes in, they rip everything out. and then the new tenant comes in and puts a whole load of new stuff in. And sometimes it's near enough identical. So it's looking at that and being like, right, well, this is what's here now. What do we want to keep? And then it's going, well, actually, if we're going to take a lot of this stuff out, so potentially taking white goods out, are there other places within our portfolio that we can move those so that we're not just every 3 years throwing all of this stuff away? So that obviously has a huge carbon footprint. It can be things like looking at, if you do a lot of internal events, for example, what food do you offer to people? You know, is that plant-based as standard? So there can be all of these different changes. And the idea is you kind of go through the course and look at the carbon impact of everything that you do, that it'll start to flag up areas that you might not have thought about before, where you can actually make quite a big impact. So one of the ones that's a really easy change that can make an absolutely massive difference, particularly for large organisations, is where are your company pensions being held? Can you move those to somewhere where they're being ethically invested? Because that's a huge, huge pot of cash, but individually we're only responsible for a little piece of it. So we maybe don't think about it as something that we have a lot of control over, but we've worked with organisations who have then raised this with the management of the company, and they've either given staff the option of being able to go towards ethical investments, or have moved the pension scheme full swathe over, so that everybody who's in that company is in with ethical investments. And we're seeing now, you know, ethical investments are as valuable, is that the right word, as effective as non-ethical investments, and that is going to keep changing as well. So we're going to get better returns from ethical investments as the world changes and goes in that direction.
Yeah, does the government have any sort of initiatives or incentives as well, as far as you're aware, in terms of making businesses or to incentivize businesses to make investments in more ethical goods and services?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always think of it as being a bit of like the carrot and stick approach. So there will be some things where it's like, here's this lovely incentive for you to do something that we think is the right thing for you to do. So if you look at now, if you're getting a company car, why would that not be an EV now? Because the incentives are so good there. Like, it just doesn't make sense for that not to be an EV. And then you look on the kind of, you know, regulatory side, where you'll be fined for doing things that damage the environment. So you've kind of got those two elements, and then kind of everything in between that's a bit of a mix of being like, these are the behaviours that we want you to do. So we'll reward good behaviour and kind of punish the bad behaviour. I think generally people would say that governments nationally, internationally, are not going anywhere far enough, fast enough for what we need. So you start to see that being driven a lot more by the private sector. So the organisations that we talk to, you know, the very large organisations are starting to get caught by some of the reporting regulations. So they will have to report on things like climate change related financial disclosures. They're going to have to report on what their carbon footprint is. They're going to have to show that they're tracking and measuring all of that stuff. Smaller organisations aren't seeing that yet. So what's really driving their behaviour change is either customers want more sustainable products, and we've shown time and time again that customers are prepared to pay a premium for sustainable goods. It's their employees and their talent pipeline. So one of my favourite facts is that the average age of a KPMG employee is 25, because of the number of junior staff that come in. So actually a lot of their sustainability changes have been driven by wanting to attract the best talent. So they're like, we cannot have an office where people walk in and we've got single-use plastics, like we'll be called up on it straight away. So having that really strong environmental policy is now just expected, and by that generation who's coming through. At a senior level, we're seeing it where if you want somebody to work in comms and PR, to go into quite complex, controversial industries, so for example something like tobacco, you have to pay a real premium to get those people, because they'll see it as damaging their long-term career prospects to have worked in that industry. You're starting to see that now with things like your oil and gas companies, you kind of your biggest polluters. People at a senior level are shying away from those industries to move into ones where they can see that they're making more of an impact and have those real kind of positive stories around them. You will find investment funds that are only open to people who are making positive environmental impact. So If you look at people like the Co-op Bank, they've obviously been in this space for quite a while. Nationwide, their mortgages only for kind of sustainable homes. And then things like, there's Palatine Private Equity, and they have an impact fund. So be able to access private equity, you have to show that your company has a positive impact to be able to access those funds. So as a business, you've kind of got those eyes all the time on like, where's your money coming from kind of investment? Where's it coming from potentially through debt financing? Where's it coming from your customers? And then the people that you work with, so which suppliers want to work with you, who the employees who want to work with you. If everybody is pushing you to become more sustainable, even if you don't care about it, it becomes the only sensible commercial option. And we're seeing a lot of businesses going down that journey now that it wasn't on their radar a couple of years ago, but they would struggle to stay competitive if they weren't putting these policies in place.
Yeah, I guess that's really important, because in like an ideal world, obviously everyone would care about all of this stuff naturally, like intrinsically. They wouldn't have to have the external motivators. But because we don't live in an ideal world, I suppose you do need sort of these motivations and these incentives.
And I think it's sometimes, we say, and don't get me wrong, like there are people who absolutely should care about it and don't, that like they just don't believe it's happening, or they just genuinely don't care if the rest of the world burns so long as they're fine. And there are absolutely that group of people. But there's also huge swathes of people who don't have the headspace to be able to care about this, because they're focused on just keeping their businesses afloat. We've been through a very, very difficult 18 months. So the thought of kind of worrying about everything else when you're literally just trying to like hit your bills every month, keep your business afloat, you don't have the headspace to be able to think about this stuff. If you think about families who are already living in fuel poverty and they're making choices between heating their homes and being able to feed their family, like trying to talk to them and being like, have you considered more plant-based options? And have you switched to a renewable supplier, when they don't have control over what that energy supply is? Like, that's not the right conversation to be having. And that's when I think it falls on those of us who are in a more privileged position to be able to make those choices and drive that change, that we take it on. And certainly if you look at where the biggest carbon footprints are, the vast majority of carbon is released by the top 1% of earners globally. So it has to be those of us, both at a country level and an individual level. If we're earning more money, we're living more privileged lifestyles, we're consuming more, we're creating more carbon, then we need to be taking more of responsibility for those changes.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think survival, like obviously that's always going to come first. Like some people, yeah, as you say, they're just not going to have the time or the headspace to think about some of these issues. So I guess that's why it means that those who do have the headspace, the time, the privilege to think about these things, it's on them. It's their responsibility, really, to do something about it.
And it's also our responsibility to engage those other communities. So there's a brilliant TED talk from David Lammy that he recorded towards the end of last year, and he talks about the Black Lives Matter movement and climate change, and a brilliant kind of play on that "I can't breathe" slogan, that is like, actually when you look at the air quality and how disproportionately that affects Black communities, around the world, but here in the UK as well, that actually it should be something that we see more Black people talking about climate change. But generally our Black communities are living in the more deprived areas, they're breathing in the worst quality air, they have a lot of other things that they need to think about, and they look at the climate change and all we see are these kind of white leaders. There's been this kind of complete divide between it being kind of a racial issue and the climate issue, and actually they're completely interlinked. So it's, if people are leading on climate change, it's like, well, what more can we do to encourage people of colour to be part of that conversation? And as part of that video, he shows a picture from Davos of 5 climate change leaders. You've got Greta Thunberg on there, and they crop the photo so you don't see the Ugandan delegates, and everyone kind of watches that video and be like, how terrible is this, that when we do have this young Black woman involved, and she's cropped out of the photo. And then we did exactly the same again to literally the same woman when you might have seen the picture over COP26 and it's Greta Thunberg sitting down with Nicola Sturgeon. Actually, that whole photo also has this Ugandan woman on the picture as well, but that's been cropped when it's been sent out to the press. So it's just being alive to those kind of issues and being like, who are we excluding from the conversation and the narrative. And if we are the people in a position of privilege, then that really kind of sits on us to make sure that we engage all of the communities, and particularly the communities who were most impacted by climate change. And that absolutely isn't yet the rich Western countries. We are not seeing the same impact of climate change as people are in sub-Saharan Africa or some of your kind of low-lying island nations.
Yeah, and again, like here as well, we're just consuming more than other areas of the world. That's the other thing, and that's the thing with climate change as a whole, is while these other areas that may be poorer are developing, it's like eventually we're going to get to a point where not everyone, like if everyone, I'm pretty sure if everyone like consumed as much as people in the UK or people in America did across the whole world, then it'd just be like an absolute, disaster. Like the world just wouldn't keep on turning, or I don't know what would happen, but yeah.
Well, and like we're not far away from there anyway. So we are currently living as if we have the resources of 1.6 Earths. So you have to go back to kind of pre-1970 to find a time when we lived as if we have the one Earth that we do. And that's with having this massive disparity. So at a global level, we're already as if we have like 1.6 Earths. If you look at people like, the US and the UK, we're at the very high end of that, and other people much, much lower. So, there are countries in Africa who their annual carbon footprint is the same as what we produce in the UK in a couple of weeks. It's that level of disparity. So as you say, it's, we want everybody to have a better standard of living and to bring everybody up. But the way that we need to do that is by massively reducing our consumption at the top, or consuming in a much more sustainable way, because the answer can't be that like we don't allow countries to develop. We industrialized our country very early. We chopped down all of our forests very early. We've reaped the benefit of that for the last like 150, 200 years. It's quite difficult to then turn around and be like, yeah, but you lot can't do it now. So if we want to, protect things like the Amazon, rainforests around the world, we want to cut down on deforestation, we need to be doing that hand in hand with other countries and being like, right, well, actually, there also has to be a financial incentive for you to protect this rainforest. There has to be a reason why this makes commercial sense for the country and the people living in it. We can't just try and stop people from doing the things they need to do to develop as countries.
Yeah, people aren't really going to do things unless there is a reason for them to do it. And we don't want to, I don't know, I feel like it's wrong as well for us to kind of tell other people what they should or should not do, because their circumstances are just completely different to ours. So
that's it. It's understanding it, isn't it? And like there are always people who are much, much better off than you. And I think we sometimes, we have this kind of pushback, don't we, when we see kind of, celebrities fly around the world in a private jet and then tell us that we should be traveling less. And it's quite jarring. But we need to understand that most people in the world, we're that celebrity level, the fact that, we can fly around the world, 80% of flights are taken by 20% of people. So it's looking at that bit that is actually being like, right, well, when I'm looking at, that very kind of, uber rich top level with super yachts and private jets and everything, that's actually how I look to most of the world. And that really kind of jarring conversation that I might see from a celebrity is actually the same kind of narrative that a lot of the world will see from us. So it's really kind of understanding that, and it's taking that personal responsibility as well, that there are absolutely people who are not going to be doing the right thing, that are going to continue polluting, that are going to continue lobbying for industries that we know are hugely damaging. That can't be the reason that we stop doing the right thing. Yeah. And literally voting, and also kind of voting with your feet and voting with your money. So choosing where to shop, choosing which kind of businesses to support, and, buying less, but buying higher quality items that last for longer, those kind of things, that then starts to drive a different kind of demand. We won't have, fast fashion if people aren't buying huge quantities of very, very cheap clothing. So it's actually changing that behavior and being like, right, well, if I choose to spend my money in certain places, that will create a demand and that will start to solve the problem. We can't just look at it and be like, well, everybody else is doing this, so it won't make any difference what I do. It's like, if everybody did that, we wouldn't have any change whatsoever.
Yeah, I think it's definitely hard for people to change their ways of thinking and their habits, and also be even just mindful of this in the first place. And there's a lot of stuff that you spoke about today which I was just oblivious to before this conversation. So I think education is a big part of this too. So what can small and medium-sized tech companies do to perhaps help and reduce their CO2 emissions?
So roll out carbon literacy training, got to say that as the first one. And it just comes down to that education piece. First and foremost, whatever your company does, you're a collection of people. So actually having those conversations, educating the people in that business, because we'll all do things in our home lives. So having that conversation, first of all, what is it that they can do individually? And then looking at starting to measure what your carbon footprint is. What are the activities that you're doing that are creating the most carbon? So for some companies, that might still be the office. So having a conversation like, do you own the building? Are you renting the building? What's the kind of setup there? So there might be things that you can do there around renewable energy, replacing normal lights with LEDs is a relatively cheap, easy thing to do. You'll get your return on investment within a few years, but has a massive reduction to your carbon footprint. Having a look at what kind of food you offer, do you use plastics in the offices? Are you recycling everything in the office? All of that stuff can change. From a more techie point of view, we're seeing a movement around things like green coding. So actually when you're developing apps, like how much energy are they using when you don't need them to be? So actually building them at the very first level to be more energy efficient. Where's that information being stored? How's it being accessed? I think we sometimes see tech as being this like incredible answer to everything that, if it's online, that's better than it being on paper, and we kind of forget how much information is being stored. And one of the great facts that we do on our carbon literacy course is if you look at the carbon footprint of a letter, that can be up to 350 grams, depending on the type of paper that you use and whether it's recycled and where it gets sent. An email, a short email between two laptops, is more like 0.3 of a gram. So we kind of then have this thing as being like, well, brilliant, we're sending emails, we're not sending letters, so we're massively reducing our carbon footprint. But in 2019, on average, every single day, we sent 294 billion emails, and 55% of those were spam. So we've kind of got this tech solution that on the face of it, you're using an absolute fraction of the amount of carbon, but it's then just made it easier to send more and more and more and more emails, and they're all sitting on servers somewhere, they're all being stored. That's creating a problem as well. So looking at kind of, green servers, things like cryptocurrency is hugely energy intensive. So looking at those kind of choices, using 4G or 5G is more energy intensive than using Wi-Fi. So just looking at those things and being like, where is it that we're actually contributing most to the problem? Because that's probably the easiest thing for you to be able to change. Yeah,
there's a lot there, and I'm sure companies and tech firms could definitely learn a lot from your training and consultancy. So what is an ESG strategy, and should every business have one?
So ESG, it's become a little bit of a buzzword recently, but it's environmental social governance. So it's looking at what do you do for the environment, how do you treat your people, and are you being governed in a kind of responsible way? Now, at a huge corporate level, absolutely, like you have to have an ESG policy. Like people are going to ask for it, you'll have to report on stuff, people need to see that. They will expect you to be aware of what your carbon footprint is and what measures you're doing to be able to reduce that. You will have to sign up to things like modern day slavery policies. You'll have to show that you understand your supply chain, how people are being treated, and you will have to comply with huge amounts of regulation. You will have to show how your company's governed properly. If you're a listed company, that brings with it huge other kinds of governance and compliance issues that you need to think about. When you bring that right back down to a small company, do you really need a full ESG policy? Like, is that a good use of your time to create this very kind of detailed policy that's probably been adapted from something that's from a much larger organization? I would say you probably don't need that full policy, but that doesn't mean that you don't need a strategy. That doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be kind of embedded in what you do. It's just kind of like taking a step back, and it's a small company. your governance restrictions, aren't particularly restrictive. There'll be things you need to report to Companies House, certain legislation that you need to follow, but generally, like, if you're running your business in a way that's keeping it afloat and isn't breaking the law, like, you're doing okay. So we can kind of leave that one a little bit. Then think genuinely, how are you treating the people that you work with, whether they're internal or external? And again, like, if you're being just like a good human, so you're coming from that compassionate point of view. So are you paying everybody fairly? Is everybody getting the time off that they need? Are you being fair with your suppliers? Are you paying freelancers on time? All of those sorts of things is just being like, as a good person running a business, how do you need to treat the other people around you in that very kind of people first approach? And then from the environmental point of view, again, it's just understanding what is the environmental impact that you're having and making positive steps. You're not necessarily going to be able to get to net zero. As a small company, you won't have that much influence over your supply chain. So you might not be able to get to net zero because there's things outside of your control. But what are the things that you can control? So I just kind of have those principles in mind when you're running the business, as being like, how can we just do better? How can we do better for the environment? How can we do better for our people? And hopefully you are already working very firmly within that kind of legal framework that, you're paying your taxes properly, you're reporting everything that you should be reporting. That should kind of look after itself in a small organization.
Yeah, and I guess like things like things like satisfaction surveys of staff, and just making sure that everyone's happy and that you're doing well. I suppose that's a big part.
And as your company grows, obviously it's hard. Elevate's a team of 3. We're a very tight team of 3 who used to work together, so we know each other really well, and it is still a constant piece of work to make sure that that culture stays, that we look after each other, as we mentioned earlier on, just having an eye out on how each other are doing. We've just signed up to a brilliant platform called Spill, which a company can sign up to and then offers online therapy. So over the course of a year, we have like 13 one-off therapy sessions. We have 5 courses of 6 therapy for anyone who's struggling a bit more. And it was really important that we brought that in for us now, so that as we start growing the organisation, that's there. Because whilst we're all happy to talk to each other and flag these things up, somebody new coming in won't have that same relationship with us. So just knowing straight away that there is a platform there. If you're struggling, you can just talk to a therapist. You don't have to ask us, you don't have to get it signed off. Literally, you can just speak to somebody straight away and access that support that you need. And it's just around that whole, what's right for those people, like just keeping that like on top of it all the time. As you go through kind of bigger organizations, you might find that the reporting of bad behaviors is more difficult. If you're a few rungs away from somebody, you're not necessarily aware of what behaviours are going on. People might feel uncomfortable reporting to HR. They might feel uncomfortable having their name on something. So there's another brilliant organisation called Culture Shift that's an anonymous reporting tool. So that's just a tool that sits online within the business. And if anybody suffers bullying or sexual harassment, any kind of negative behaviours, that can be reported anonymously. So they've not got that fear of it coming back to them. They're not putting that name on it. And it increases the amounts of reports that go through the organisation. And they then work with the organisation to kind of manage those, to put in changes to make sure that doesn't happen again. So it's just being kind of mindful of how big your organisation is. Things that work when you're very, very small might need to change as you grow, because you won't have that same relationship with everybody in the company.
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to vary just depending on the size of the business and where you're located, in terms of, people being remote.
This move to remote working, that changes. It's much easier to see how somebody's doing if they're physically in the office with you. And it's much easier to be like, oh, should we just grab a cup of tea and have a chat if you spot something that's not right. If everybody's working remotely, it's much easier to jump on Teams or Zoom and, everything looks fine and the world can be falling apart around you and nobody sees it. So just making that extra effort to check in with people if you're not physically seeing them is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was quite pleased to see actually at Hive IT the other day, we did a satisfaction survey, and the results came back, and Johnny, the founder, kind of went through the results, and they were pretty good, really. Just all like high 8s and 9s. But I guess there's always room for improvement in in any business, and that's the main thing.
It is, and it's a constant piece of work as well, isn't it? And it's not that, like, you know, you do it once, everybody's happy, and you pat yourself on the back and you're like, oh, cool. It's looking at that and being like, brilliant, we've got the results that we wanted. What is it that we're doing well that's meaning that we get those things, you know, and how can we do more of it? And if people are coming through with slightly lower scores in different areas, like, how can you do more to support? And then just constantly measuring that stuff is really, really important. But it's brilliant to see, you know, organisations doing that and taking it really seriously.
Yeah, definitely. And like, there's going to be some individuals who might have like a 6 or a 7 or a 5 or even lower, and I guess figuring out those problems and resolving it, it's just dead important.
And if there's any patterns as well, I'm absolutely not saying that this is the case in your organisation, but sometimes you have a person in an organisation who's responsible for quite a lot of the issues, you know, having the wrong line manager, which is either, you know, the person isn't suited to it, or quite often they've not been trained or supported to be able to line manage other people. That one person can cause a lot of issues within an organisation. So having those kind of surveys across, if you found, for example, you know, you're getting all 8s and 9s apart from a certain team who are much, much lower, that flags up quite quickly that there's an issue in a certain part of the business. So you can start to spot trends, and that might just flag up issues where nobody's, you know, directly reported this as an issue, but you can see it's affecting a group of people. So it's just so important to stay on top of that, and there's many ways as you can open up that conversation and just really kind of empower your colleagues to talk up. And, you know, we said right at the beginning, didn't we, about understanding how you do your best work and what makes you more productive. You know, have those conversations with the people around you. You know, if you work better at certain times of the day, if you need to have that physical interaction, it would really help you to have some time in the office. If, you know, having certain days where you can be at home, because that really helps you to get through more of that kind of head down admin stuff, like having those really open conversations, like that should just be good for everybody. Like the business wants you to be as productive as possible, you want to be as productive as possible, so working out how you can best manage that should be good for everybody. But I think sometimes we forget to have those conversations, or we assume that everybody wants to work in the same way that we do, so we think we've created a process and environment that's wonderful because it works for us, but then you're potentially bringing people into the business who that doesn't work for, and they need a different type of support.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've seen that sort of agile methodology, that flexibility, that individual like person focus a bit more through the pandemic, with, you know, people working from home, and then that being a bit of a catalyst for other decisions, and people having more choice and freedom to really do what suits them.
It's just blurred that line a little, hasn't it, between like work and home. And if there is a silver lining to everything that we've been through, it's, you know, like I sit on calls now, and my business partner's got 2 young children, and the amount of times that like one of them will end up on the call, things will be going on, and it's now just like that's part of her world. Like one of the things that she is a mum of 2, like that doesn't need to be hidden, like that doesn't impact her ability to do her job. She's phenomenal at what she does, and she can do that with 2 kids running around, which in my mind makes her like even more incredible that she can juggle all of those things. And that's just fine now. You know, nobody challenges that. You know, they'll have a business meeting and there'll be children or pets or builders or Amazon deliveries or whatever it is going on around us. And it's kind of, you know, we look a lot more like people now. We're not just sitting in very sterile white meeting rooms pretending that we don't have a life outside of the office. And I do really hope that as we go back into normal, and hopefully we are kind of getting closer to that we can bring that with us, that we don't have to pretend to be, you know, like work alone or home alone. It's just like, I'm a loner and this is like the whole mess of my life. And, you know, we'll just crack on and do that.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. So my final question for you, and this is a little bit more broad, but it's a question I tend to ask pretty much every guest, is what can people do to make things better?
So I think the key thing here would be to listen. There's very, very few situations that wouldn't be improved by you spending a little bit more time listening. We're in a world where we have so much information thrown at us all of the time, but are we actually listening to that information? Are we taking a bit of a step back? You know, listen to what the people around you are telling you, because generally people will tell you if things aren't okay. So just listen for those things. And if people have got different viewpoints, if people have learned different things, just listening to all of that stuff, just it makes you a better person and it makes us a better business. You know, most of what we did for the first 3 months of Elevate was listening to people who we wanted to work with, and then creating what they needed. If we'd just gone in kind of all guns blazing, being like, this is what we want to do, we wouldn't have had that same response. And we've kind of kept that going all the way through. We always want to talk to other businesses. We always want to talk to other people. Like, I'm dead nosy, so it helps. It's like, I want to know what your world looks like. I want to understand what your business does. So I constantly listen to those stories. But then it's really listening to each other as a team, the cultural relationship that we've got because we'll take time to listen to each other. So there's absolutely more we can do there. As I'm saying it, I know I'm guilty of not slowing down and listening enough on all of those occasions. But I think if we did just all take, just a few minutes every day to just think, have I listened properly to what people are trying to tell me? It would have huge changes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's so many distractions now that is becoming increasingly difficult because people's attention spans are getting lower. You've got apps like TikTok and Instagram where it's just like constant videos and people aren't really focusing or listening to that content often.
The amount of times I'm having a conversation with my husband whilst Netflix is on and I'm messing around on my phone, and I'm like, am I actually listening to what you're saying to me, or have I got like half an ear on you telling me about your day and half an ear on like Dynasty because it's incredible on Netflix, and like for scrolling through Twitter? And I'm like, none of these things need to be going on in my head at the same time. So just setting aside that time, and things like, just like going out for a walk together is useful because it takes that distraction away. And we do some work with the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester, and like they're just incredible in what they do. But that first trip back to the theatre in the summer, and it was an emotional play anyway. It's called Bloody Hell, and it was incredible. But like we were all in tears by the end of it, and part of it was like that was the first time since the pandemic started that I was completely transported away from my world. It's not the same as watching a film. It's not the same as reading a book. There's literally nothing else going on around you. You're completely immersed in somebody else's story and what's going on. And taking those kind of things out, it just made me realize how constantly distracted I am by everything else. So just really dedicating time to certain things, investing in that, and really listening to what's going on is hugely important.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think kind of transporting away from work is a wonderful thing to do from time to time. And also just on the point on Dynasty, I've got to literally ask my girlfriend, please can you pause that every time I FaceTime her, because she's always watching that, literally.
I've got such unrealistic life goals as a result. I can't even tell you, carbon literally straight out the window. I want a private jet now.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try and avoid that, otherwise I will end up desiring things that I don't want to desire. Okay, anyway, where can people find you, Ilona, and where can people find Elevate?
So as I've just said, I'm on Twitter a lot. So Ilona _Alcock on Twitter, and Elevate is at ElevateGM. Also on Insta at Elevate_North. Very active on LinkedIn. Let's just search my name. There's not many Ilona Alcocks in the world, so very easy to find on LinkedIn. Share a lot of content there. And just drop me a message. Emails on the website. Drop me a message. If you want to have a chat about anything, I genuinely want to listen to your story.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been really good talking to you. I've learned a lot, and I hope other people have too. So thanks a lot for listening to today's podcast, and I hope you have a brilliant rest of your day.